Hi everybody, my name is Samer Aoudi and this video is part of the ethical hacking course. In this lesson, I will discuss the first phase of engaging our target, which is the reconnaissance phase. So let us get started. I discussed in a previous lesson that there are different penetration testing methodologies. And while they may seem that they're doing different things because they have different namings, in essence, they're outlining a similar process, the penetration testing process. There is a pre-engagement phase where we plan, prepare, we define our scope, the rules of engagement, and so on. And then the penetration testing work starts. If we are following a black box model, then we don't have any information about the target. And therefore, as a first step, we need to gather information. Reconnaissance or recon is the process of doing just that. Without getting technical, in this phase, we simply collect information about our target. So let's agree on that. However, let me go over some jargon you should be familiar with. So reconnaissance, or short recon, is the process of gathering information about a certain target, like a company, for example. The output of recon is an intelligence report. So you might hear the term open source intelligence, for instance, where a tool would collect information from several open sources on the internet. We also use footprinting to describe specific and often technical type of reconnaissance. So for instance, you might say DNS footprinting. And sometimes we use the term fingerprinting also for something more specific, like operating system fingerprinting. When information gathering goes deep and becomes more intrusive, we call it enumeration. So our target is an organization of some sort, right? Therefore, they have people, computers, servers, and other IT and networking infrastructure. We want to collect as much information about this target as possible. Sometimes students ask me, why do I need to collect information like somebody's name, for instance? The answer is every piece of information counts. So let's see a couple of examples as a starting point. From a name, you can get a username or an email ID, and from there you can perform a brute force attack to get the password and then access a system. Another example, from a website, just knowing the website, you can get an IP address, maybe fingerprint the web server, and from there you might be able to enumerate the default password and again gain access. Last time I covered this topic in class, the first question I got from a student was, is it legal? Is information gathering legal? The answer really depends on the type of information we are collecting and the way we are getting that information. For instance, getting publicly available information by performing, let's say, a Google search is definitely legal. However, enumerating running services on a certain system is illegal in many places. Also, it is very common for companies to perform competitive intelligence to see what the competition is doing. But of course, if they take it too far, it may become industrial espionage, which is very illegal. Related to legal matters is the categorization of footprinting in terms of target interaction and also traceability back to the hacker or the penetration tester. For example, passive footprinting is all about getting publicly accessible information. You gather it with no interaction with the target whatsoever. For instance, you may perform a web search. On the other hand, active reconnaissance involves exposing our information gathering to discovery. So, for example, when you call a company from your phone, this is traceable back to you. The challenge with information gathering is that there is a lot of information in a lot of places with a lot of techniques and tools and so on. It can become really very difficult and maybe unmanageable pretty fast. As soon as you start this process, you will realize how overwhelming it can get. This is when a methodology comes in handy because it provides a systematic approach to this huge task. Here are some categories of information with some techniques that you might use. Notice here that sometimes a simple internet search will do the job. More on that shortly. Another quick way and a practical way of organizing reconnaissance tasks is to use the grouping in our Tigerbox Kali Linux. Under the information gathering category in Kali, there are 10 groups of tools. There's a total of 35 tools, and recently I set out to demonstrate all security tools in Kali, and as of today, I demonstrated 21 tools in 6 videos, all under the information gathering group. The playlist is called Kali Linux Security Tools, and I highly recommend you watch these demos right after completing this lesson because they're very related. And by the way, please excuse my voice, I'm not feeling well today. Searching the internet is a very nice and a passive technique to collect information about people, but also to retrieve hidden information on websites. Google hacking or dorking is simply the use of advanced search features in Google, but manipulating that search string with specific operators to search for confidential files and even to find vulnerabilities. Before we see Google hacking in action, let me talk about websites for a moment. A website is simply a collection of web pages written in a language called HTML or the hypertext markup language. So a website consists of these web pages, but also we can see other files. So sometimes we see pictures, and sometimes we see videos, sometimes we can download files from a website. So these other files and artifacts are part of the website. When you click a link in a website, your web browser sends an HTTP request to a web server somewhere in the world. The server responds back with the resource you ask for example, the home page of Google. But sometimes it will respond with an error message. Simple, right? Okay, let's go back to reconnaissance. So what kind of information can we collect from a website? In fact, it's a ton of information. We can collect information about people who work in the company, contact details, phone numbers, email addresses, and so on and so forth. But also, we can find files and hidden documents. You see, a website, as I mentioned before, is a bunch of files that reside inside folders on a computer somewhere, right? What some administrators do is hide files thinking that this will secure them. So a very important note for my students: Hiding information, hiding a file, hiding something in general does not secure it. Okay? So if we consider people information and files as non-technical stuff, then what about the technical things on a website? Again, there's a lot of those that we can uncover. For instance, we can potentially identify the web server. What kind of a web server is it? Is it Apache, Tomcat, etc., and so on? We can discover if it's a WordPress website and what version of WordPress or other CMS. All this information, the non-technical and the technical that I just mentioned, can be discovered using Google Dorking. So let me demonstrate. Okay, so here we are about to perform a Google search, and most people, 95% or even more, would come here and just put in the keyword that they're interested in. But for us, we're gonna use the advanced search. The advanced search will allow us to tweak in our search and search within a domain if we want, search for particular file types, search within the URL, the title, the text, or anywhere within the website or a web page. So let's try it. First of all, I'm interested in a particular site or domain, and this is my target. So I usually use Altoro Mutual as an example. And there it is. Okay. And you can put in a keyword here and you can specify other things, but let me just give you a simple example. So I would say this exact word or phrase. I'm gonna put a password here. Okay, so I'm looking for the keyword password within this website. Okay, so I got an ad, but in general, I got the results only in Altoro Mutual, except for the 2 ads that I got. As you notice here, we're still in Google search, okay, and this is our key term exact, and you can see inside double quotes. But also notice this search string that is used, which is within site. So now we're up in the 5% who can use the advanced search. But let's see if we can even go higher by manipulating these search strings. So let's say I'm interested in the URL. Some websites, they use a specific port, and I'm gonna test port 8080 here. So in the URL, I wanna see if port 8080 is being used sometimes, for example, to manage the CMS or the content management system. So let's test it. So as you can see here, this is what I'm talking about. So 8080, and this is a login page. Let's go back and try to search for something else. So now, instead of in URL, I'm gonna look in title, and I will look for a technology. So let's say Apache. Couldn't find anything. Let's try, instead of in title, in text. So all in text. Also couldn't find anything. So if you want to be now in the top 1%ers who can really do very interesting things here, you don't need to start from scratch. You can go to the Google Hacking Database and you can see a lot of examples, not just examples, actual search terms or dorks that you can use yourself when you're performing penetration testing. So let's visit. This is the exploitdb.com, and as you can see here, this is the Google Hacking Database. So here we are, and it's processing. You can see these are dorks. It's taking long, and there it is. Okay, so you can see here there are many categories, and you can see the date added, the actual dork. So a dork here would be the full search string, and basically it can look for a technology, it can look for a file, and these people have experienced a specific a set of technologies, for example, WordPress or certain email technology or a web server, and they created these dorks to get the information they're interested in. So we can see here, for example, these are files containing juicy info. So we look for here in title, index of, passwords, and gov. We can see here in URL admin/index.php, and you can do a search, of course, and you can learn more and you can try them yourself. So for example, if I look here by category, so let's say I'm gonna filter it, and I'm gonna use you can look for vulnerable servers. That's interesting. Okay, so these are dorks specifically dealing with vulnerable servers, and if I choose one of them, right, it's right here. If you click this, it will actually perform a Google search with this specific dork, right? And you can specify, you can customize it to suit, for example, your site or your target. So here, for example, I would add altoromutual.com, and of course in the beginning it was searching the net for any of these server vulnerabilities. Now it's looking specifically within my target domain or website, and in this case it couldn't find any. Of course, there are a lot of other tools out there that can help us collect information from and about website. So for example, in part 5 of the Kali Security Tools series, I demonstrate very useful open source intelligence tools like Maltego and Spiderfoot. To have a public website, you need a registered domain, something like google.com or altoromutual.com or itisalat.ae, and so on. A Whois directory is a public directory with information about registered websites. Let me demonstrate. This right here is the ICANN lookup directory. So what we can enter is a domain and try to get some information about it. Let's start as usual with Altoro Mutual. And there it is. As you can see, I got some domain information, included the name server, and I will be talking about name servers in the DNS section very shortly. Looks like this will expire in few days, in 12 days or so. The registrar information, the registrar is where we register domains, and some additional information. Okay, so let me try the same in Netcraft. As you can see, we get a lot more information, including network information. Remember, we mentioned one category of information gathering is network and network ranges. You can see here some IP information, hosting history, technology, and so on. Let me go back to ICANN and look up something else. As you can see, I used a different top-level domain, .ae instead of .com, and I got an error, TLD not supported. There are different directories for different regions and different top-level domains. So let's go to the IANA website and look up who's taking care of the .ae TLD. It's in the United Arab Emirates. And the Whois directory that has information about .ae domains is this one. I always get those wrong. Oh, there it is. So as you can see, I got the information that I wanted. I can look up the same information in Netcraft again. And I got my information straight away. Website can also be used by hackers to get information about us. One technique is to send a web bug within an email, for example. The concept is very simple. When we see an image in a web browser, it means our web browser requested and got this picture from the server. That means we directly interacted with the server, revealing our identity. When an email is in your junk folder, for instance, you can go check it out, you typically wouldn't see any pictures. Why not? Well, it's because those messages are not trusted by definition. That's why they are in the junk folder. When you move the same message to your inbox, pictures will be downloaded. Recently, some email clients started countering this technique by giving us the option to hide our identities. That means even when they download a picture, they wouldn't reveal our identities. However, not all clients are doing so. And finally, a hacker may use a website as part of a phishing or a pharming attack. To perform such an attack, the hacker would create a website that looks exactly like a legitimate website in an attempt to trick us. So for example, a website that looks like my bank's website. Anyone can easily do this using a technique called web mirroring and a tool like httrack. It's a very easy tool, it's a visual tool, and what it does, it simply downloads all the web pages and the client-side technology. A very quick note on this. Anything that we see on our computer within our web browser is already on our computer, right? So you can simply do a file save and you would save a web page on your machine. A tool like httrack would automate this recursively and would get all the web pages of a website. And our final topic for today is the domain name system, or the DNS, which is a system that resolves host names to IP addresses. Us people, we prefer names, domain names like google.com, for example. But computers use numbers like an IP address. The DNS system is a lookup system, and it looks like an inverted tree with a parent-child relationship between the domains. You can see after the root, the top-level domain, or TLD. This is your .com, .net, .gov, .edu, .ae, and so on and so forth. To get a domain, basically what you get is a second-level domain or a child that you register. So when you say csf.ae, CSF is the name that you choose and register if it's available, along with the top-level domain. The third level is the subdomain level, and the default one is www. A lot of us used to type www all the time to get into a website, but you don't have to. Whether you type it or not, it's the same thing. The www here is a resource, a subdomain if you will, but it is the main subdomain. That means you can do without it. However, if you have something like sales or marketing or HR or customers or support.domain.com, then you would need to explicitly write it when you write the address in your web browser. The DNS database has records that we can look up as part of our reconnaissance process. And these are the main records that you see here in front of you. A quick note that a lot of them will be empty. Administrators wouldn't leave any information in these databases or these records. So they are records in a table, and most of the time they don't include any information. Some of them are always there, especially when you have a public domain. So let's start with SOA, or the start of authority. This indicates the server that has the authority for that domain. MX lists a host or domain's mail exchange server, simply the mail server. NS, or the name server. A is the IP address of a certain host. PTR would list a host domain name where the host is identified by its IP address. SRV is the service location record. HInfo, or host info, is a record with technical information, for example, the CPU type, the operating system, and definitely you will not find any information in there. TXT is for text. It's a generic record that sometimes administrator would leave note and they would forget to remove them later. So always check for this record. CNAME, or the canonical name, is basically an alias. So if a host has an alias, the CNAME might have that information. And finally, RP is the responsible person for the domain. And again, most likely we will not find any information in there. One security risk in DNS server is something called a zone transfer, which refers to enumerating all the DNS records that you see here in front of you using a special record called the AXFR record. And we do that usually from a single host on the domain. This should not be allowed once the system is in production mode, and it's very rare that you would be able to perform a zone transfer. I cover DNS tools in part 1 of the Kali Security Tools series, so I highly recommend that you watch that video because I will not be demonstrating DNS records here. Finally, what are the countermeasures that we can do as the blue team to defend against footprinting? Number 1, always evaluate the information before you publish it, which means look at your information, ask yourself, is it public, is it private, is it confidential? And of course, if it's private or confidential, don't put it out there to be available, and remember, hiding information is not securing it. Number 2, always harden the configurations of your routers, your firewalls, your intrusion detection and prevention systems so that they restrict footprinting requests. Restrict the capabilities of web crawlers. These are the bots in search engines like Google, for example, that would go into the directories and files of our website in order to index them in the search engine. So from our side, we can use something like the robots.txt file to tell the crawlers not to go into certain places. Always educate people not to reveal information, because social engineering is a big way where a hacker would get information easily about their target. This is it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you found it useful, please hit the like button and subscribe.